November 4th, 2020, the finale of Africa's Business Heroes. Cameras rolling, audience waiting, but something's wrong. The judge's chair sits empty. Jack Ma, China's most recognizable billionaire, the man who built a $500 billion empire from his apartment, simply isn't there. No explanation, no goodbye, just gone. For 88 days, the world would wonder, where is Jack Ma? The man who once commanded stadiums of screaming fans had vanished without a trace. Markets trembled. Investors panicked. How do you make a $50 billion man disappear? China was about to show the world exactly how it's done. The rise of Crazy Jack. 25 years earlier, Jack Ma was nobody. An English teacher in Hangzhou making $12 a month. Failed the university entrance exam twice. Rejected from 30 jobs, including KFC, where 23 out of 24 applicants got hired. He was the only one they turned away. But Jack Ma had something that couldn't be taught. An unshakable belief that the future belonged to those crazy enough to chase it. In 1995, a business trip to Seattle changed everything. Ma encountered the internet for the first time. He searched for beer, found results from Germany, America, Japan. Nothing from China. He searched China itself. Still nothing. That moment of digital invisibility sparked an obsession. If China didn't exist online, Ma would put it there himself. He returned to Hangzhou with a mission. In 1999, he gathered 17 friends in his apartment. The pitch was simple. Build a marketplace that would connect Chinese manufacturers with the world. They called it Alibaba, after the character who opened doors with magic words. Open sesame, Ma would say. We're opening the door for small businesses everywhere. Those early days were pure chaos. The team worked 18-hour shifts, sleeping on the floor, eating instant noodles. When they finally turned their first profit, Ma handed out cans of silly string to celebrate. The entire office erupted in foam and laughter. By 2003, they launched Taobao, their answer to eBay. Ma's competitive strategy was unconventional. While eBay charged fees, Taobao was free. While eBay was corporate, Taobao felt like a digital street market where anyone could sell anything. If eBay is a shark, we are crocodiles, Ma declared. In the ocean, we die, but in the river, we win. The rivalry became legendary. Ma had his employees do handstands during breaks to keep energy high. He dressed as a punk rocker at company events. The Chinese media dubbed him Crazy Jack, and he embraced it completely. Today is hard, tomorrow is harder, but the day after tomorrow is beautiful, became his rallying cry. Most people die tomorrow evening. By 2005, Yahoo invested $1 billion for a 40% stake in Alibaba. Ma had proven that crazy could be profitable. But this was just the beginning. The real breakthrough came with Alipay, Alibaba's payment system. In a country where credit cards barely existed and trust was scarce, Ma created digital money that actually worked. Suddenly, millions of Chinese citizens could buy and sell online with confidence. Ma's vision expanded beyond commerce. He launched Ant Financial, turning Alipay into a digital bank that served hundreds of millions. He bought newspapers, invested in logistics, created cloud computing services. Alibaba wasn't just a company, it was becoming the infrastructure of modern China. The numbers were staggering. Singles Day 2019 generated $38 billion in sales. More than Black Friday and Cyber Monday combined. Ma commanded audiences of 50,000 people, speaking like a tech prophet about the digital future. In the next 30 years, the world will change more than it has in the past 300, he proclaimed, and we will lead that change. By 2014, Alibaba's IPO raised $25 billion, the largest in Wall Street history. Ma rang the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange, grinning like he'd just pulled off the greatest magic trick ever performed. He was no longer Crazy Jack. He was China's richest man, worth $50 billion. A former English teacher who'd been rejected by KFC now employed more people than most countries. His face was on magazine covers worldwide. His quotes were studied in business schools. But in China, success this visible comes with a price. The bigger you become, the more attention you attract. And in Xi Jinping's China, no one, absolutely no one, was supposed to be bigger than the party. Ma's empire had grown so vast that it knew more about Chinese citizens than the government did. Every purchase, every payment, every financial decision flowed through his systems. He had accidentally built the world's most sophisticated surveillance network, and Beijing was starting to notice. The man who'd opened doors with magic words was about to discover that some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. China's government was about to remind Jack Ma who really controlled the kingdom. The question wasn't whether Ma had grown too powerful. The question was how long Beijing would let him keep pretending he was in charge. While the world celebrated Alibaba as an e-commerce success story, something far more significant was happening behind the scenes. Jack Ma wasn't just building a shopping platform, he was constructing the most comprehensive surveillance apparatus in human history. It started innocently enough. Alipay needed to verify transactions, so it collected financial data. Taobao needed to recommend products, so it tracked shopping habits. Ant Financial needed to assess creditworthiness, so it monitored spending patterns. But then the data streams began connecting. Your Alipay purchases revealed where you shopped. Your location data showed where you traveled. Your social connections mapped your relationships. Your loan applications exposed your financial vulnerabilities. Ma's companies didn't just know what you bought. They knew when you were broke, when you were cheating on your diet, when you were having relationship problems. They could predict pregnancy before women told their families. They could identify political dissidents by their spending patterns. Data is the new oil, Ma proclaimed at tech conferences. What he didn't mention was that China was sitting on the world's largest oil field, and he controlled the drilling rights. By 2015, Ant Financial launched Jima Credit, China's first comprehensive social credit system. It wasn't government mandated, it was voluntary. Citizens eagerly signed up because it offered convenience. Skip security deposits, get better loan rates, access premium services. The algorithm was elegant in its simplicity. Pay bills on time? Score goes up. Buy diapers and baby formula? Responsible parent, score increases. Purchase video games at 3 a.m.? Questionable lifestyle choices, score drops. Associate with people who have low scores. Guilt by association. Your score drops too. Within 2 years, Jima Credit was evaluating 400 million Chinese citizens. The system could determine your trustworthiness based on your friends' financial habits. It could predict criminal behavior from shopping patterns. It could identify undesirable citizens before they even committed crimes. Ma had accidentally solved surveillance capitalism. While Western tech companies struggled with privacy regulations, China embraced total transparency. Citizens didn't just accept the monitoring, they competed for higher scores. The implications were staggering. Alibaba's ecosystem processed more transactions than Visa and MasterCard combined. Every digital payment, every online purchase, every financial decision in China flowed through Ma's servers. He had real-time data on 1.4 billion people's economic lives. But the most dangerous part wasn't the data collection, it was the analysis. Ma's artificial intelligence could predict social unrest by monitoring spending patterns. It could identify potential protesters by tracking their social networks. It could forecast economic problems months before they occurred. Ma's companies knew when factories were struggling because worker meal purchases decreased. They knew when regions faced unemployment because loan applications spiked. They knew when political movements were forming because communication patterns changed. This wasn't just business intelligence, it was state intelligence. Ma had built a crystal ball that could see into China's economic and social future. And he'd done it all in the name of customer convenience. The Chinese government watched with growing fascination and alarm. Here was a private citizen who knew more about Chinese society than the Communist Party itself. Ma's data revealed truths that traditional government surveillance couldn't capture. Every citizen's loyalty, productivity, and potential for dissent was quantified in Ma's algorithms. The man who'd started as an English teacher now possessed the most powerful social control mechanism ever created. But Ma made a crucial mistake. He began to believe his own mythology. He started thinking the data made him untouchable. He forgot that in China, information is power, and the party doesn't share power. Beijing had initially celebrated Ma's innovation. His systems were making China more efficient, more predictable, more controllable. But they were also making Jack Ma indispensable. And in Xi Jinping's China, no private citizen could be indispensable. The question wasn't whether Ma's data empire was valuable, it was priceless. The question was, who would ultimately control it? Ma assumed he'd built his kingdom to last forever. He was about to learn that empires built on data can be conquered just as easily as empires built on land. And China's government was preparing to launch the most sophisticated corporate takeover in modern history. The man who'd collected everyone else's secrets was about to discover that Beijing had been collecting his. October 24th, 2020. Shanghai's historic Bund district. The city's financial elite gathered for the annual finance summit. Bankers, regulators, government officials, all there to discuss China's economic future. Jack Ma took the stage like he had 1,000 times before, confident, charismatic, completely unaware he was about to commit corporate suicide on live television. For 20 minutes, Ma delivered what he thought was a visionary speech about financial innovation. What he actually delivered was a declaration of war against the Chinese Communist Party. Today's banks are still like pawn shops, Ma declared, his voice echoing through the packed auditorium. The audience shifted uncomfortably. Chinese banking regulators sat stone-faced in the front row. But Ma wasn't finished. He was just getting started. Good innovation is not afraid of regulation. But we cannot use yesterday's methods to regulate tomorrow's businesses, he continued. We cannot use the way to manage a train station to regulate an airport. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Ma had just called China's financial regulatory system obsolete, in front of the very people who ran it. He pressed on, seemingly oblivious to the tension building in the room. The Basel Accords are like an old people's club, Ma said, referring to international banking regulations. It's designed for solving problems of the last century, not this century. Every sentence was another nail in his coffin. Ma was essentially arguing that China's entire financial system needed to be rebuilt around his vision. that traditional banks were dinosaurs, that regulators were holding back progress. We need to change from a mindset of controlling risks to one of managing risks, Ma declared. China's financial system has no systemic risk because there's no system. The audience was stunned. Ma had just insulted China's banks, its regulators, and its entire financial infrastructure in one sweeping statement. He was suggesting that his company, Ant Group, represented the future, while everything else was the past. But the most dangerous moment came when Ma talked about lending. Banks have a pawnshop mentality, he said. They want collateral. But young people and small businesses don't have collateral. They have dreams. What Ma was really saying was this: traditional banks are too conservative. They require proof you can pay back loans. Ant Group would lend based on data and algorithms. They would democratize credit by giving money to people banks wouldn't touch. It sounded revolutionary. It was also terrifying to anyone who remembered what happened when financial institutions abandoned lending standards. Ma was essentially proposing to recreate the subprime mortgage crisis, but with Chinese characteristics. The speech concluded to polite applause. Ma walked off stage, probably thinking he'd delivered another masterpiece. He had no idea that every word had been recorded, analyzed, and forwarded to Beijing within hours. In the audience, regulators were already making phone calls. Text messages flew between government officials. The man who'd built his empire on understanding data had completely misread the room. Ma's fatal mistake wasn't what he said, it was when he said it. This wasn't 2005, when China welcomed disruptive entrepreneurs. This was Xi Jinping's China, where the party's authority was absolute and unquestionable. Ma had essentially stood up in front of China's financial establishment and declared himself their superior. He'd suggested that his private company understood finance better than the government. He'd positioned himself as the solution to problems he claimed only he could see. Within 48 hours, the consequences began. Ant Group's IPO, scheduled to raise $37 billion and value the company at over $300 billion, was suddenly under regulatory review. Ma's 20-minute speech had just cost him the largest IPO in history. But that was only the beginning. He'd awakened something far more dangerous than regulatory scrutiny. He'd awakened Xi Jinping's personal attention. And once the Chinese president decided you were a threat, there was nowhere to hide. Ma had spent years building the perfect surveillance system. Now it was about to be turned against him. The retaliation came swiftly and methodically. Within 72 hours of Ma's speech, Ant Group's IPO, the largest in history, was suspended indefinitely. $37 billion vanished with a single regulatory announcement. But this wasn't just about stopping an IPO. This was about dismantling an empire, piece by piece, until nothing remained but a cautionary tale. December 2020. Chinese regulators launched a formal antitrust investigation into Alibaba. The charge? Monopolistic practices. The evidence? Years of forcing merchants to choose between Alibaba or competitors, never both. Ma had built his empire on exclusivity deals. Sellers who wanted access to Taobao's massive audience had to sign contracts promising they wouldn't sell on rival platforms. It was brilliant business strategy. It was also illegal market manipulation. The investigation moved with surgical precision. Regulators didn't just examine recent practices. They went back years, dissecting every contract, every deal, every competitive move Ma had made. They found a pattern of systematic market control that violated China's antitrust laws. April 2021. The hammer fell. Alibaba was fined $2.8 billion, the largest antitrust penalty in Chinese history. The fine represented 4% of Alibaba's annual revenue, sending a clear message: no company was too big to punish. But the fine was just the beginning. The real destruction was happening behind closed doors. Ant Group, Ma's crown jewel, was being systematically dismantled. Regulators forced the company to separate its lending business from its payment services. They demanded Ant surrender its precious data to government-controlled entities. They required the company to obtain banking licenses for services it had operated freely for years. The message was unmistakable. Ant Group would continue to exist, but as a heavily regulated financial institution, not a freewheeling tech company. Ma's vision of disrupting traditional banking was dead. Meanwhile, Alibaba itself faced a forced restructuring that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. The company was split into 6 separate entities: cloud computing, e-commerce, logistics, media, international commerce, and local services. Each division would operate independently, with its own CEO and board of directors. The sprawling empire Ma had built over 2 decades was being carved up like a conquered territory. The official explanation was enhanced focus and agility. The reality was simpler: divide and control. 6 smaller companies were easier to regulate than one massive conglomerate. But the most devastating blow was personal. Ma's voting rights in Ant Group were reduced from 50% to just 6%. The man who'd built the company from nothing no longer controlled his own creation. New board members were appointed, many with obvious government connections. Independent directors were installed to ensure proper oversight. The transformation was complete. Ant Group had been quietly nationalized without anyone calling it nationalization. The financial markets reacted with brutal efficiency. Alibaba's stock price collapsed, wiping out over $200 billion in market value. Ma's personal wealth evaporated, from $55 billion to $35 billion in just 6 months. Other Chinese tech giants watched in horror and took notes. Tencent quietly restructured its operations. ByteDance canceled its overseas IPO plans. Didi rushed to delist from American exchanges. The message had been received: conform or be destroyed. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of Ma's destruction was how legal it all appeared. Every fine was justified by existing regulations. Every restructuring was framed as corporate governance improvement. Every limitation was presented as consumer protection. China had perfected the art of corporate assassination through bureaucracy. They didn't need to arrest Ma or seize his assets. They simply regulated his empire out of existence, one compliance requirement at a time. The man who'd once commanded stadiums now attended mandatory meetings with regulators. The visionary who'd inspired millions now required government approval for basic business decisions. The revolutionary who'd promised to change the world had been reduced to a compliance officer in his own company. Ma's data empire, the real source of his power, was being systematically transferred to state control. Every algorithm, every user profile, every predictive model was now subject to government oversight. The surveillance system he'd built was being nationalized. The systematic destruction was almost complete. But there was one final humiliation waiting. The man himself needed to disappear. China was about to demonstrate that in the digital age, the most effective way to silence someone isn't to arrest them, it's to make them invisible. November 4th, 2020. Jack Ma's empty chair at Africa's Business Heroes finale wasn't just an absence, it was an erasure. The man who'd built his brand on constant visibility had vanished completely. No farewell message, no explanation, no goodbye. One day he was everywhere, The next day he was nowhere. The silence was deafening. Ma's social media accounts went dark. His scheduled appearances were quietly cancelled. The Alibaba founder, who'd once tweeted regularly to millions of followers, simply stopped existing online. Financial markets panicked immediately. Alibaba's stock plummeted as investors wondered, was Jack Ma dead? Arrested? In hiding? The uncertainty was almost worse than bad news would have been. Conspiracy theories exploded across social media. Some claimed Ma was under house arrest in a government facility. Others whispered he'd fled to Singapore or Switzerland. The wildest rumors suggested he'd disappeared permanently. The fate of other Chinese billionaires who challenged the party. But the truth was more sophisticated than simple imprisonment. China had perfected a new form of punishment for the digital age: controlled invisibility. Ma wasn't in jail. He was in limbo, free to move around but forbidden from speaking publicly. Allowed to exist, but not allowed to matter. It was psychological warfare disguised as benevolent silence. The first stage sighting came in January 2021, a carefully orchestrated video appearance at a rural teacher conference, Ma's pet charity project. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. His usual energy was gone, replaced by careful, measured words about education and social responsibility. The message was clear. Jack Ma was alive, but the Jack Ma everyone knew was dead. The rockstar CEO had been replaced by a subdued philanthropist who spoke only about safe, approved topics. More sightings followed, each one carefully managed. Ma playing golf with friends, photographed from a distance. Ma visiting rural schools, surrounded by handlers. Ma attending low-key business meetings, always with government officials present. These weren't public appearances. They were proof-of-life photos designed to quell speculation while maintaining control. Ma was visible just enough to prevent international incidents, but invisible enough to send a message to other entrepreneurs. During those 88 days, something fundamental shifted in China's business culture. Other tech billionaires began speaking more carefully. Controversial social media posts were deleted. Bold predictions about the future were replaced with praise for government policies. The Ma doctrine had been established. Step out of line and you become a ghost. Not dead, but not really alive either. Present, but powerless. Wealthy, but worthless. Meanwhile, Ma's empire continued its systematic dismantling. Board meetings happened without him. Strategic decisions were made by others. The companies he'd built operated as if their founder had never existed. The psychological impact was devastating. Ma had spent decades building his personal brand as China's most visible entrepreneur. His face had been on magazine covers worldwide. His quotes were studied in business schools. His speeches drew crowds of thousands. Now he was reduced to whispered sightings and blurry photographs. The man who'd once commanded global attention couldn't even send a tweet without government approval. But perhaps the cruelest aspect of Ma's disappearance was how normal it became. After the initial panic, markets adapted. Alibaba's stock stabilized. Business continued. The world learned to function without Jack Ma's voice. He'd become expendable in his own empire. The companies operated fine without their founder. The algorithms ran without their creator. The surveillance system functioned without its architect. China had achieved the perfect punishment. They'd made Jack Ma irrelevant while he was still alive to witness it. When he finally resurfaced publicly in March 2021, the transformation was complete. The man who'd once declared war on traditional banking now spoke only about sustainable agriculture. The revolutionary who'd promised to change the world now focused on growing vegetables. The 88 days in the shadows had done their job. Jack Ma was back, but he wasn't Jack Ma anymore. He was something new. A living example of what happens when you forget who really controls China. The message to every other entrepreneur was unmistakable. This could be you.